everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Next in Time podcast. I'm your host, ST Tangarala, and our guest is none other than Harout Markarian. If you want to know more about Harout Markarian, he is the founder of Markbotix, a company that develops assistive robotics to revolutionize independent living and accessibility. With a seasoned background within the aerospace and defense industry, Harout believes that an accessible world is an inclusive world and that Markbotix will reimagine the accessible robotics industry. And they are partnering up with a community of people with disabilities to find solutions together rather than fixing their problems from an outside perspective. So, Harout, welcome to the show.
Thank you, ST. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no problem. So, is it true that, especially with the fact that the world is aging faster, and then there are fewer younger people out there trying to look after the elderly. Is it true that this is a necessary technology that's needed for the world?
Absolutely. Even before talking about the increasing elderly population, the community of people with disabilities historically have been left behind. And I think it's time for someone or for anyone to put more effort into putting the community of people with disabilities first. They're the largest minority group in the world, and for some reason they're still left behind. So we're trying to change that. We're trying to address that need by providing solutions together and improving their quality of lives.
Yeah, because I think I can relate to the fact that there are a lot of elderly out there that are losing their mobility. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's cases like, for example, if you recall that President Trump's first wife, Ivana, fell off the stairs and passed away. Yeah. And it was found out because of her limited mobility and because she had a hard time accessing the stairs. Do you feel that kind of issue is it's prevalent nowadays with elderly people, or even let's say even people who are disabled?
Well, that's a fraction of the issue, right? Mobility is a broad term, right? There's when we talk about people with mobility challenges, we talk about a lot of things. We talk about hip replacement surgeries, like we talk about spinal cord injuries. We talk about cerebral palsy. So all this, makes the people with mobility challenges. And when you think about it, they're often prone to additional injuries because they're limited mobility. And when we talk about accessibility, not being able to climb up and down stairs is just a fraction of the accessibility topic, right? There are other things that that needs to be accessible. But yes, being able to climb up and down stairs is part of an accessibility issue that needs to be addressed.
All right, makes sense. So let's start off back with Harout. Harout being the lovely engineer when he began his career, let's say, because you have a seasoned background in the aerospace and defense industry. So could you tell me more about like your overall background as to what you did before starting at Markbotix?
Well, before I was a basketball player. I was a professional basketball player actually, and didn't even think about school or my college career, my educational path. So that was all like secondary, even tertiary at points. But when kind of that went away from my life, I started focusing more on my college career. So I ended up getting a degree in mechanical engineering in my undergrad. I pursued my master's in robotics. And, during my undergrad degree, I was already working full-time in the aerospace and defense industry. And not because I chose it, is because it was an opportunity that, fell on my lap. My professor at the time recommended me to this one position in the aerospace and defense industry company. So I just went ahead and started that job and basically loved it and stayed in it.
Yeah. So I was going to say, before we go into your background in the aerospace industry, How? Just wondering, how are you like 6'4", 6'5", or anything like that? Which
No,
is
no,
why you got into the
I'm
basketball field?
no, I'm 6 foot tall.
Just like around the same height as me. But
Yeah.
yeah, but actually the funny thing is for me is that the only time I ever played basketball more seriously was when I was in middle school.
Mhm.
And after middle school, I just never really considered it going forward.
Yeah.
And I remember when people said, okay, this guy, everyone kept saying, oh, just because he's tall, meaning I'm a good fit for the basketball team. So I presume that's what people said about you back there, right? Like, just wondering, are you originally from Armenia?
I am, yeah. So I was born and raised in Lebanon, but
Yeah.
by ancestry, I'm Armenian, yes.
Okay. So people told you over there, like, oh, look, Harut is going to become someone great. He's going to join the NBA one day.
No, actually, no, they told me the exact opposite. When you're playing basketball in Lebanon, as a pro athlete in Lebanon, there's no future in that if in pursuing that field, really. You're not going to make a living off of playing basketball. At least not you're not going to secure your future by playing basketball in Lebanon. At least in my days. I don't know how it is right now, but in my days it was you weren't making any you were making some money, but you weren't securing your future or anything, right? Um so and I was obsessed. I practiced all the time, and I was good. I was good, and I wasn't the tallest. I was 6 foot tall, and but I was very good in the ball handling, shooting, and I was very fast. So those were my assets, and I could read the floor well. So
Yeah.
I
Do you mind if I ask what position were you?
point guard.
Point guard. You were like
Yeah,
basically the main person on the team.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I practiced, and people used to come tell me actually the exact opposite to what you said. They'd be like, "Why are you practicing so hard? You think you're going to get to the NBA, or you think you're going to get to the next level?" But I didn't care. I used to practice without lights sometimes, But that's how much I loved the game, and I was passionate about it.
Oh,
But
nice.
yeah,
Who be your inspiration?
at the time, Steve Nash was my kind of idol,
Okay.
but my father also played professional before me, and he had a long career in professional basketball. He played
I
15,
think he
17 years.
admired people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, he played for 15 or 16 years in professional basketball. I played maybe 6 years, 5 years, 6 years. So that I had to immigrate after that. So which was a blessing in disguise.
So you're currently living in California, right?
I'm in Los Angeles, yes.
Los Angeles. So what was the journey on, making you move from Lebanon to LA?
It wasn't pretty. We applied for the green card years ago, actually 10 years before we got here. Um, when we first applied, I wanted to be in America, but when the time came to leave Lebanon, I didn't want to come here because, as I was saying, I was living the dream pretty much. I was playing professional basketball. I was no work, no responsibilities. It was like
Hmm.
a dream come true, and I was fairly young, so I didn't want to give all that up, but at the same time, I wasn't building a future. So,
Right.
and at the time, my dad, told me that we're moving. And just long story short, I always knew that when my dad said something, it was always to my benefit. Even though I disagreed with him at the time, and I was mad at the decision he and my mom made. Ultimately, I knew it was for my benefit. It was for the family's benefit. So I just, packed my stuff and came here.
All right, cool. So now shifting focus towards what you've been doing as part of the aerospace industry. When you started that career, do you feel like that your experience playing basketball kind of helped propel your career in that direction, or something different? Or is it just you just love planes or even spaceships?
I think no, it's different. I think having a passion for something is important. When I was playing basketball, I was passionate about it, right? Unfortunately, nobody worked on my mindset, which is a huge deal when it comes to anything, especially if you're a pro athlete. Having a strong mindset, having a strong mental faculty is really important. And when you have that, it can be transferred to other areas of your life, to other careers that you may have later. I wasn't mentally, I wasn't very strong when I was playing basketball, but I knew teamwork, I knew leadership, I knew collaboration, right? That all came from basketball. So that stuff is transferable to any other industry. So I took that with me. Yes, I took that with me in the aerospace, and in my job, in my career, basically over there, and it benefited me a lot.
So where did you work in the aerospace industries?
I worked at several places. I worked at Boeing. I worked with Northrop, and these are the main two companies that people know of usually. But I worked for other companies like Circor Aerospace, Mason Controls, and they all did. They were all smaller businesses that fulfilled bigger contracts for the bigger guys, like the Boeings of the world and the Raytheons of the world and the Northrops of the world.
Yeah, it makes sense. And also, then you transfer from the aerospace industry to the defense industry, right?
Well, it's all in the same realm. Aerospace and defense is kind of the same thing. So it's one sector, it's one industry.
All right, cool. So what were some important contributions you made to those two industries?
So I worked a lot. Most of my projects was with the military. So I visited air bases a lot around the US. My first job was actually to work on the trainer aircrafts for the US Air Force. So we redesigned the landing gear and gave it to the Air Force. That was a cool experience. I enjoyed it. I met a lot of cool people. At Boeing, I did the air refueling project, which was an autonomous air refueling project, which was very cool. And I was working on the C-17 at the time. So, you could refuel the C-17 mid-air without pilot interaction. So that was one of the projects I'm very proud of. I have a few patents actually designing remote controllers for to control heavy military vehicles. So those are some of the stuff that I've done. Some I can talk about, some I cannot talk about.
Okay, yeah, you don't have to. I mean, because you just don't want to expose what we're behind the scenes. Especially this is more like I presume you must have signed a contract or an NDA saying that you cannot reveal the deepest, darkest secrets.
Absolutely. I mean, everything I told you is no secret. Everybody knows. But there are things, as you said, that if you have clearance, you shouldn't disclose any of that, right?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, fast forward to now Markbotix. So when you started this company, so I've read on your bio that because of the fact that you've been dealing with difficulty seeing your grandparents suffer with mobility issues, Can you tell me more about what's that situation like for you and how did that influence you?
Absolutely. So my grandparents, they both had strokes. Unfortunately, we lost my grandfather a couple of years ago. My grandmother is still living, and after the stroke, their mobility was pretty much gone. They were completely dependent on caregivers, and their lifestyle changed 180 degrees. And it was difficult for everyone. Yes, it's difficult for the person who had the stroke, who went through the stroke. It's very difficult for them, especially the transition that they went from being fully functional human being, I mean, what we call fully functional, it's like basically you can depend on yourself to perform activities of daily living. And now they're fully dependent on caregivers. So that was a huge emotional dump, basically on them, but also on the family, right? Now we have to take care of my grandparents. We know how they used to be, and now we're seeing them suffer that way. It wasn't easy for us, and we were trying to manage with there's a shortage in caregivers, plus acquiring a caregiver is not cheap, especially if trying to
if you were to say in supply demand terms, there's a low supply of caregivers, that means it's more expensive to hire one, right?
Well, absolutely, yeah. The prices are just ridiculous, and I mean, don't get me wrong. The caregiver's job is very difficult. So they deserve every penny that they're getting, but at the same time, the people who require the help don't necessarily have the funds to pay them, right?
Yeah.
At least pay them to their need, right? To pay them to fulfill the amount of time that they will require them to stay and help them.
Yeah,
So it's very difficult.
because I was gonna say, I think one of my friends and my fiance, my not yes, I'm not married or getting married, but my partner's fiance and one of my friends, they're both caregivers, and I can understand where they're going through in terms of like the difficulties in taking care of this person. I mean, the good thing about thing about caregivers is like you can either have like the easiest day where the patient doesn't have to require so much, or they're gonna go through one of the worst periods where it's like it gets very stressful.
Yeah, I mean it's very daunting. You know, it's very they're doing the heavy lifting basically in all aspects of the word. Basically, they're and it depends from one patient to the other, right? Some are very demanding in terms of their situation, and some are less demanding. And hopefully, we're trying to address that with Markbotix and with the prototype with our robots that we're developing,
Yeah.
right?
So yeah, tell me more. I mean, you don't have to disclose every single detail about the robot, but in terms of the overall vision of what you're trying to build with Markbotix, tell me more about it. Like, how are you trying to solve the caregiving issue?
So, oftentimes when I talk about this, people think that I'm getting rid of caregivers, or Markbotix is trying to get rid of caregivers, and that's not the case at all. Actually, we're trying to help the caregivers, right? Because there is a shortage, and because there is, inflation, especially now, inflation is at all-time high, right? But people
But
are
as of I was just going to say, as of today, I think Congress just passed the Reduction Act.
yeah,
So
that's just a band-aid. It's not gonna. I mean, I follow politics a lot, and that's not going to solve any problem, any of the problem that we're having, because it's a supply demand issue, right?
right.
You can't just dump more money on something and expect the problem to go away. It doesn't work that way. But that's a deeper conversation. I mean,
I know you don't want to go. We don't want to discuss like politics because it's going to cause a bit of a rift on everyone.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
It,
But yeah, so and people with disabilities in general are actually living below the poverty line. This is a fact, right?
right.
So having them pay for caregiving services, I'm sure insurance covers it for them, but they will fight tooth and nail to not have to pay, right? So they're in a difficult situation as well. They're living below the poverty line, and at the same time, they need caregiving services, right? So how is Markbotix helping with that? So we developed a ground robot. It's called Grace, and it stands for Ground Robotic Assistant for Care Enablement. It's going to help the individual who needs the help and the caregiver. So it will alleviate the simple tasks
like picking things up from the ground or walking.
Yeah, so let's say, I don't know, I mean, my grandmother drops the fork all the time, right? So instead of the caregiver bending over 10 times in 5 minutes, right, you can have the robot do that, right? If she requires a tissue, let's say, for her nose, or she requires a remote control, or she requires someone to open the door for her, now the caregiver doesn't need to be bugged by these simple tasks, right? So she can save her energy for heavier lifting tasks.
Yeah, it's kind of like the way people envision AI is that AI is going to take over all jobs, but in reality, it's just trying to make the jobs more easier for people to take care of.
Exactly, and I'm one who is against that statement. I think, well, I'm going to preface that by saying that technology is very powerful, right? And the way technology is progressing is also very fast. Now, you can use technology to do good or to do bad. So it comes down to ethically where you're at, right? Ethically where you're at. What are you doing ethically to impact people's lives?
Right.
That's what it comes down to. And what we decided to do with this robot, which will have AI incorporated in it, is to help both the caregiver and the individual. So it will help the individual in performing activities of daily living safely and independently. It will increase their quality of life, and it will help the caregivers not to worry about the simple tasks, but focus on the more complex tasks that the robot won't be able to do because it's a liability issue or because we're trying to reduce cost of acquiring the robot. And now, instead of having the caregiver 24/7, let's say, you'll have it 3-4 times a week, right? And then the rest, the other 3 days would be, just you're depending on the robot to do so it will help both sides.
All right, cool. So regarding the robot, like how is it like a mobile robot, or how is a robot like how do
Yeah.
you see the robot like taking role of a taking its role?
So it's a mobile robot. It's and it will have 1 or 2 arms. I can't say that yet. It's a humanoid robot, and it will move around your environment and assist you in doing various tasks.
Okay, so makes sense.
Yeah, and you can have your relatives. Let's say if I'm going to check on my grandmother and I'm not home, right? I can log into through my phone. I can log into the device and I can monitor what's going on at home, talk to my grandmother, see if she needs a help. I can activate and control the robot remotely.
So where exactly in terms of the development is it right now?
We're doing the industrial design right now. We have done a lot of market vetting in terms of to see to convince ourselves before we convince investors that there's really a need for this product. And we did that. We have done 1.5 years of testing, right? We have developed a prototype and we tested it with people with various disabilities. And it turns out that there's a huge need for this. Now we're doing the industrial design, and of course, we're actively raising funds. I mean,
okay, yeah. Where exactly? So, what do you have like a particular timeline as to where you're wanting to have this fully implemented with the caregivers and everyone else? Like,
well, I'm anticipating a launch product launch to happen July of 2023. That's the projection. And meanwhile, we're working on right now. Actually, we are in talks with the Triumphs Foundation and the Christopher Reeve Foundation to be in partnerships with them to distribute the robot.
oh, makes sense.
Yeah.
So why is it? So just wondering what challenges do you see in these types in having the robot developed? And let's say for example, there's a lot of outlets out there. Like Japan is famous for having a lot of caregiver robots placed all over the place, especially considering the fact that the population is aging very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say, for example, if they decide to come to the US and start competing with you guys on providing the best quality robotic care, how does Markbotix be able to step in and say, okay, you know what, we want to showcase that we have better ways on how we can care for our patients?
Well, I mean that could definitely happen. There are a lot of companies out there that financially are far advanced than we are, right? And but we do have an IP protection on the robot as we speak today. And at the same time, we understand our audience. We don't just look at the data. We actually talk to our target customers,
right.
And actually, we know their needs. We know how much they can afford, how much they can afford to pay. We know what kind of activities they need help with. So all this is our own research, right? And ultimately, it comes down to, look, if you want to help people, you can't be bogged down by thinking about other companies coming and competing with you, because we're not competing, we're innovating. So
yeah, that's what I call the golden rule for startups is you innovate, you don't just compete to the lowest denominator.
we can't compete on price. Clearly we can't compete on price. Any big company can come and put us out of a job tomorrow if we compete on price, but that's not what we're doing.
Yeah, because I'll tell you this, I've been working with startups for the last 3 years now, and one thing I've always saw that they're like, if you were to work elsewhere, like there's always those possibilities where large companies can just beat you down with price. Let's say for Amazon, like there was a lot of different e-commerce stores out there, but Amazon beat out all their competitors through low pricing.
Yeah.
But some of the startups that I've worked with, they try to have proprietary systems in place so that, okay, that's how they can establish their competitive advantage
Yeah.
over everyone else.
Yeah.
So I think what you're doing is that you're trying to create a very high quality robot, be able to properly care. And let's say if there are any risks regarding that robot, let's say, for example, if someone tries to enter the market, sell them robots at much lower rates than what you are. So are you trying, and let's say they have better functionalities, for example. So how would you how do you find yourself competing against those kinds?
Well, I mean, we have to be first to market first of all, right? So we have the IP protection. We have to be first to market, and then we have to keep innovating. Complacency is your worst enemy, right? Even with all the patents of the world, people can still change simple stuff and then regenerate similar solutions, right? So, but I mean, it all depends on the mindset. As I talked about, mindset is very important. What kind of mindset do you have, and what's your relationship with your customers? You know, do your customers? You have to establish that brand. Once you establish the brand, and your customers recognize that brand, it's very hard for them to switch easily, right? And that's what we're working on. Actually, one thing I'm very proud of, I've built a community. Like now, people in the disability community know that I'm working on this.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah, because you told me offline that sorry, I just got ding messages from everyone
yeah,
else saying you gotta join other meetings, but yeah, that's fine. But I've gotten messages, or I've gotten when we spoke offline, I think you mentioned that you used a podcast to be able to interview with people who are disabled to get those right ideas.
mm.
So do you feel that's a good way of reaching out to potential customers?
Well, when I started the podcast during the pandemic because I was before the pandemic, I was actually going door to door, basically meeting people and asking about their pain points to see what products I'm going to go to market with. But when the pandemic happened, obviously all that effort was stopped, right? You can no longer visit people. So, and that's why I created the podcast. It was an alternative way of pursuing my research and getting to know people. I actually befriended a lot of people through my podcast.
Right.
People with disabilities that till today, they're friends of mine. I talk to them. I get advice from them, share my progress with them. It's actually, I built a community with that.
All right, cool. So now what's your overall goals with Markbotix in terms of, what you're trying to do is service every caregiver in the world, let's say start with America, then all over the world, right?
Yeah, so our immediate goal right now, obviously, is to find an investor, a strategic investor that our visions are going to align. And what's our vision? Our vision is very simple. Our vision is to close the gap of those who can afford the assistive robotics and those who cannot. And in the world, only 1 in 10 have access to the assistive technology that they need. So there's a big gap, right? Only 10%, or even less than 10%, like 0.1% have access to the assistive technology that they would need. So our mission and vision is to close that gap and then be the most trusted assistive robotics manufacturer for people with disabilities in the world. That's our vision.
All right, cool. That makes sense. So I'm just going to ask some final questions since we're running out of time. So what advice would you give to other founders out there, or even people who want to build their own thing and want to provide the proper mission and want to create the right mission and vision for what they're trying to do?
Well, you have to dig deep inside yourself, first of all, to know what your purpose in life is, right? And this a lot of people talk about purpose, but not a lot of people understand what that means. And your purpose, my purpose when I was 20 is different than my purpose in my 30s. Is different than my purpose now. And you have to constantly work on that. And then once you find what you truly want to do, you have to be able to work for free until you get it to a certain place where you can you get paid pretty much, right? So you have to be willing to do that. And when can you do that? When you actually enjoy what you're doing. When you enjoy what you're doing, it doesn't matter whether you're getting paid or not, because you believe in your vision, you believe in your mission. So you have to consider that, you know, you're going to have to put in a lot of time. Is it difficult? Yes, it's very difficult. It's very challenging, but at the same time, it's very fulfilling to impact people's life, to add value to other people.
All right, Harout, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to be a guest on the Next in Time podcast, and I'm looking forward to seeing how Markbotix turns out to become.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Esti.